My name is Mariko Sida. I'm a water resources engineer, and I come from Seven Engineering Consultants, an SME based in Greece. And I have with us my colleague Hajar Shamoun, who's a gender expert and is also joining this interview. So very recently, Seven undertook a study for the Global Water Partnership on understanding the gender-related issues in IWRM, in line also with the Sustainable Development Goal 651. So the main objectives of this study was to showcase and disseminate a range of practices that have been implemented by different countries around the world in order to mainstream gender issues in IWRM. Also talk about challenges, key enabling factors, provide recommendations on how we can further pursue gender mainstreaming. And basically, this study was based on two things. First, we compiled real examples from 23 countries that we interviewed. And secondly, we analyzed the responses of the countries to the very recent 2020 SDG country survey on the indicator 651. Yes, that's indeed true. Of course, we have to acknowledge that numerous countries have developed gender strategies helped by NGOs, governments, development banks, and so on. But we're not there yet. So evidence has revealed a clear gap between policy and practice. And this is the essence of why we're lacking. So gender mainstreaming is not always well understood. Sometimes it's not accompanied by concrete action plans. Sometimes it's not funded adequately, and or the measures and the mechanisms are fragmentedly implemented. So on the whole, also the monitoring and evaluation processes are not sophisticated enough to reveal the true gender dynamics. So in practice, we have also observed in many countries that mainstreaming, gender mainstreaming, is not always necessarily identified as a priority and explicitly recognized at various levels of policy making, but it's treated as a separate ad hoc topic, which is integrated in the IWRM policies at a very later phase. So, despite the challenges and the gaps that I previously mentioned, many countries have taken significant steps and concrete steps towards advancing gender mainstreaming in IWRM. So based on the interviews that we conducted, we identified 6 key enabling factors of comprehensively mainstreaming gender into IWRM. Now, many countries have developed mechanisms and tools and practices which fall under these 6 enabling factors. I'm just going to start mentioning 3 first ones, and then I will pass the word to my colleague Hajar to explain the other 3 ones. So the first enabling factor is advocacy and high-level commitment. So basically, a strong commitment of the executive leadership at the high level is a key into driving the whole process. Of course, we should consider here that this component is subject to the political agenda. So potentially, it could shift every time we have a change in government. Also, there is sometimes a gap between the political discourse and the design and the focus of the policies for gender mainstreaming. We had a nice example from South Africa where there is a strong political will for gender mainstreaming. So all departments are given a mandate from the president to establish transformation units to pursue gender mainstreaming. A second enabler is the legislative and policy framework and the governance. So on one thing, we can say that if we have an egalitarian legal framework promoted by the Constitution, this is a very important pillar because it creates robustness and sustainability. But we need to be careful that the Constitution on its own, on itself, does not guarantee implementation of gender equality policies. So it is a good thing to have, but it has to be backed up with specific policies and plans. In some countries, specialized gender policies are integrated in IWRM, but also here we need to carefully consider how the concept is integrated. So it is not just to have a focus on water uses and management approaches, but is really to integrate all gender perspectives within the IWRM. Talk about differences in needs, in practices, employment, vulnerabilities, and impacts of gender, and all this. A third enabler, which we feel is very important and was really picked up in the interviews, is the human capital, the financial resources, institutions, and support organizations. So it is very important to have an earmarked funding allocated to gender mainstreaming specifically. We have this example in Philippines. So one positive aspect there is that the law itself really has budget provisions. There is a certain percentage in government agencies to be spent for gender and development activities, and it's called the GAD Fund. So this clearly creates an enabling factor. In terms of human capital, we have observed that in many countries there are gender units. This is a very good practice to establish dedicated gender units. But we need also to consider that these gender units need to be funded adequately and resourced adequately. So we need to have the proper staff, the proper expertise, and the proper funds for these units to be able to operate and do their work properly.
Maggie, so indeed we have identified a fourth enabler, which is supporting women's participation and parity. And it is really essential to promote normative change about women's participation and parity in integrated water resources management, and engage women, but not only women, women and other vulnerable groups in the whole water value chain. So, it starts by not only seeing women as simply end users, and that they should be integrated at all various levels of decision making. We've seen, during the interviews, countries which have mentioned quotas, and how quotas have enabled women to be in the room and to participate. And we know how representation is important. But something also that was mentioned during the interviews, and I think is really important, is that, first of all, women's participation in itself, it does not guarantee that gender is mainstreamed. There are other components that we are explaining right now through the enablers, but definitely representation. And we need to have women in the room, and we need to make sure that women not only are in the room, but that are participating or have access to are able to make decisions and participate in how decisions are being made, and making sure that their voices are being heard. Not only that they're in the room, but that their voices are being heard. And so, when you think about gender mainstreaming, it's that connection between gender issues and how these gender issues impact the water resource management process. So it's about who makes the decisions, but also looking at who is impacted by these decisions, and are these decisions informed. And this takes us to the fifth enabler, which is monitoring activities to track and assess progress to target. What that means is that we are putting in place centralized monitoring systems overseen by a national body, and the vast majority of the countries that we've interviewed have a national statistics office, but making sure that this body has access to the necessary means and has the skills to develop gender sensitive indicators to make sure that any policy or program integrates these indicators to make sure that we have clear objectives to reach, and to be able to also measure these targets and the accomplishment, the achievements. So this is very, very important. This is very important to make sure that no one is left behind. And we talk a lot about women, but we've also highlighted other vulnerable groups, and having gender disaggregated data is very important, but also looking at other vulnerable groups, the elderly, the people with specific needs. So it's really important to have an inclusive overview at who is impacted by the policies and the program, and who is participating in drafting these policies. The sixth and final enabler is awareness raising, capacity building, and education. But the main issue here is that it is important that the water establishments, water bodies, the relevant ministries are able to also engage in discussions with other ministries, with the civil society, with different organizations, to be able to also gather information, exchange experiences and expertise on the issues related to water and sanitation. We've had countries like Panama who've discussed greatly their collaboration with the Ministry of Public Health, and how that was very important for them to be able to also engage with local communities, to be able to collect data. So these exchanges, these multi-stakeholder consultations are very important to make sure that we engage with all relevant actors that are able to inform the decision, and also taking into consideration that, when we talk about gender mainstreaming, we also have to take into consideration that there is a certain expertise that is needed. So you need to have gender experts that are able to collaborate and engage in how these policies are being informed and how they're being drafted. And so these multi-stakeholder consultations are very important, and they also is important, and this has been highlighted during these interviews, that these consultations, trickle down all the way to the local communities, making sure that consultations are being done, and that we are giving opportunities for different community members to be able to engage in how decisions are being made, and also reflect on how they are impacted by specific policies. Gender mainstreaming is a universal issue that is important for all countries, and that should be taken into consideration and promoted by all countries. What we have seen during the interviews is that we have found countries from both the developed and the developing world who are facing challenges, who are making progress is being made, but who are also facing very similar challenges in implementing gender mainstreaming strategies or defining the strategies. And so it is very important to note here that it is not related to your economic ranking, but what is important here is that commitment, that conviction, that you need to be to put in place inclusive processes to make sure that no one is left behind.